Welcome to the round 2 roundup with Grandmaster Jan Gustafsson. 3 decisive games, 2 draws yesterday, or in the second round. Let's talk a bit about the games, about the 2 draws first. Maya Aronian and Caruana Maxime Faget-Lagrave. What can you tell us about those games?
I'm in Meyer against Aronian. I don't know the theory of that line very well. Meyer played one e4, which he does sometimes, and he has a well worked out repertoire there as well. Aronian, who typically is an e4, e5 player, went with the Sicilian. I think he's been trying to change his repertoire a little bit with both colors, tried to make it a sharp game, but it looked like Meyer had things very much under control and got a somewhat favorable position where Levon had to pay some attention, but in the end he held without too much trouble. So usual business, obviously. Aronian higher rated than Meyer, but could not pose any problems with the black pieces. So standard game, I would say. And then we had the clash between Caruana and Maxime Faget-Lagrave, 2 top 10 players. Caruana with the white pieces was a very funny opening. e4, c5, knight to c3, d6, d4, pawn takes, queen back to d2, b3. Some line that Carlsen used like a year ago to beat Wojtaszek, I believe. And they had a theory debate, but it sounded like from the press conference that they both couldn't really remember any details, so they were freestyling, and I think they both played very well. I think Caruana found some good ways to put pressure on Maxime, but Maxime also defended on a very high level. That's the thing with these close to 2,800 players. They're so hard to beat, even if they're under pressure, and therefore it was a draw, but I think a very good game, actually.
We call it the Carlsen system now, perhaps?
I'm not sure that's fair. I think there was some Greek guy, whose name currently escapes me, apologies, who came up with this, and then he sent it to Team Carlsen. So I'm not sure we can give Magnus credit for it, but he gets enough credit. He'll be okay.
Okay, let's go to some of the decisive games. Switter won his first game yesterday against Arkady Neidich with the black pieces. Quite a good game, I think.
Yeah, it looked like a model game. It was this, what do you call it, exchange Ruy Lopez, 3 bishop b5, a6, bishop takes c6, d takes c6. And this structure, historically we've always learned black has to avoid piece exchanges because white has a majority on the king side and black has to be careful. But if you look at it with modern computers, they're always fine with black. Even if you exchange dark squared bishops, they often give black a small advantage. And that game sort of showed that if both sides play slowly, black actually has a lot of dynamic potential in his position. And I have to admit, I haven't analyzed it in detail where Arkady went wrong, but it looked like Svidler just improved his position step by step, and then he came up with a very nice knight maneuver. The knight went all the way from g8, f8, g6, f8, e6, d8, b7, d6, c4, and did a lot of damage on the white queen side. So it looked like everybody who wants to fight against this exchange Ruy Lopez could learn a lot from that game and Svidler's treatment. I thought it was a very well played game.
The idea with b6 and a5 and bishop a6 was quite very also decisive thing in the game, I think. Peter also mentioned that in the interview.
Yeah, he just used his pieces very nicely. There were no ideas we haven't seen before, but you have to put it all together, and move by move the timing just seemed very good by Peter. Also some small details like you exchange one pair of rooks but keep the other one. He seemed to enjoy himself in that game.
Very good. Then we had another big game for Vincent Keimer, playing first game against Magnus Carlsen, second game Vishy Anand. He lost again, but quite a good fight again. What do you think?
Well, the good news for him is it gets much easier. In round 3 he plays Caruana, who's never even been world champion, so he should be fine there. But in the game against Vishy, I don't know, he played the Najdorf according to Peter Leko, or, well, I have no doubts about it. I know how much Peter works on openings. They've worked on this a lot, and it looks like Vincent in general now has a very mature, worked out repertoire, so it's not like he will get in trouble out of the opening. But of course Vishy is a big expert and has 30 years of experience in all these structures and feels the nuances. So I thought both sides played well in a very complex position, but you could tell at some points that maybe Vishy understood the subtleties a bit better. Vichy didn't seem to think he did anything special until there was one key moment where Keimer went knight f4, and I think Vichy pointed out that if you play whatever was bishop to f6, then knight b5, rook ec8, that nothing much has happened in the position. But the computer disagreed, and it looked like Vichy was making some progress. And after that, if you give Vichy a chance to sort of simplify the position but still keep the pressure, Vichy is very good if he has clear targets. And after his knight f4 takes, rook e6, I think that was... The computer won something like takes, and knight c5 is more resilient, but that already felt like Vincent was fighting an uphill battle. So nothing extraordinary. He's facing one of the greatest players ever with the black pieces after facing arguably the greatest player ever. So 0 out of 2, he shouldn't despair. But yeah, so far he's learning some lessons.
He also has to work some bit on the time management, I think, because he had some time trouble again against Vichy.
It's easier said than done, though. As the outsider in these events, you don't want to do anything stupid. Vichy has more experience in these structures. Sometimes you just need a while to figure out what's going on. But of course, from the outside, it's always, it's better if you have more time left, but it's not easy to fix.
Okay, let's go to, I think, the game of the day yesterday. Vallejo against Magnus Carlsen, again with the black pieces, but quite a long game again yesterday. What can you tell us about that game?
Yeah, it was a somewhat surprising opening for me. Not the line itself, but after 1 e4 recently, Carlsen has been quite successful playing the Sicilian. But against Vallejo, he went for e5, played a bit of a sideline of the Ruy Lopez, this move 5, bishop to c5. The line he had played before against Kayakin. And I was slightly surprised because in that line, if white wants equality, it's reasonably easy to achieve a dry position. So I thought Magnus would try to make it more unbalanced. But Magnus being Magnus, he got that dry position they got, and he just kept playing moves. I think personally he wasn't very impressed with his level of play. He mentioned that somewhere down the stretch in this endgame, which was roughly equal most of the time with Paco being in time trouble. But he mentioned he missed some things like this f4 check in one key position when he had to go g takes f3, and black is actually a bit lucky that h4 check there doesn't win a piece. And it looked like Paco was just fine. Magnus pointed out, I think on move like 38 or 39 with Vallejo in time trouble, he could just have grabbed a pawn on b7, and it's black that has to make a draw. But it's also the experience of playing Magnus Carlsen. He keeps making moves, asking questions, and Paco allowed the game to continue further. Then after the 40th move, it wasn't clear-cut draw. And all of a sudden he was facing an uphill battle, had to simplify into this endgame we see on the board after some adventures. They got this very non-standard endgame with rook and bishop versus knight and opposite color bishop, which we don't see very often. So let's have a look at this position. So they got this endgame where obviously black is the side playing for a win. And for me, I have to admit, I thought going in that in general this material distribution should be a draw, which is just very wrong. It's normally winning for black if there's opposite color bishops on the board, because these bishops can't get exchanged for each other. And that means that normally black has enough of an attacking force on these dark squares to actually checkmate white. It's by no means easy, and it's one of these things where table bases will often say it's mate in 56 and you have to do it within 50 moves, but then sometimes you can win a piece or take a piece before these 50 move rule hits. So it's a tricky thing. But yeah, I was sort of surprised really that it always seems to be winning for black with best play, when I thought, okay, we have these two pieces that can create a barrier and it should be a draw. But yeah, I learned something there. Magnus seemed to know that it was winning generally, but he also wasn't sure about the method. He said it's one of these things you might get once in a lifetime and there's no real point in trying to memorize how to do it. But as a sample, let's look at the position we have on the board here with black to move, where Magnus decided to bring his king to the queen side with king g5, and he walked a long way to come here. But that's not really the plan, and Vallejo could have set up resistance, stopping the king from entering on the queen side, and he could have made it, at the very least, past this 50-move barrier. And the winning method here, obviously, taught to us by computers and table bases, but I found it quite instructive, is to go rook d2 check. This rook looks to be well placed on the second rank, but you go rook d2, forcing king to e1, can't step into this cover check, and now you go all the way back to d8 with the rook, cutting this king off along the d file, which is very counterintuitive because it looks like the rook is better placed on the second rank. But in this position, white somehow can't keep up his construction. Like these pieces are perfect, stopping the black king from entering, and the king is perfect, stopping the rook from entering, but you have to give ground. And the key line, and I think what Magnus missed, or he wasn't sure about a detail here, is that after king f1, now you give a check, the king has to go here, and after rook to e1, it's another Zugzwang, where white has to give ground. He can't keep his construction once again. He would like to pass, because the bishop has to defend the knight has to defend key squares on g3 and g1, and the king also has to defend, surprisingly, the f1 square. So it looks like the most sensible move is king to h2, but then rook to f1 just overloads the white defenses, and there is no escape for white. There's some lines here, but basically king g2, rook f2, picks up the bishop, and after bishop g2, rook f2, you're also just not in time to keep everything under control. There were some other options, I think. Magnus mentioned the move knight to c3, but basically once white has to give up his construction here and can't keep his pieces together, black always wins with direct play. Here, for example, check, king h2, rook f1, and once again, the white defenses just collapse because of king g2, rook f2 check. So I'm not sure this is useful knowledge for anybody, because like Magnus said, it's a once-in-a-lifetime situation. But I was a bit surprised that with this very limited material, it always seems to be possible to generate enough play to actually checkmate the white king or win a piece. So in the game, yeah, Magnus didn't find the quickest win, but he said in a practical game it will always be much harder to defend, and he was right. Vallejo eventually collapsed, and Carlsen picked up, well, his second win with the black piece in this tournament, I think his 5th win in a row, so 5 out of 5 out of his last games. World champion, doing well.
Well, playing against another world champion today, against Vishy Anand with the white pieces. So it's a classic, I think, a classic battle between those two.
Yeah, I looked it up earlier. I think 12 wins for Magnus, 8 wins for Vishy, and 65 draws, something like that. So they've played each other quite a bit. And yeah, it's one of the evergreens we have in modern chess. Will be exciting to watch.
Yes, and we'll be excited to talk about that game tomorrow again. Thank you, Jan Gustafsson.
Thanks a lot.